Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Baker Institute. I'm Ed Jeredjian, the founding director of the Institute. We have a very interesting panel this evening to discuss life after Ike, the future of Houston and Galveston. Before Hurricane Ike roared ashore in the early mornings hours of September 13th, 2008, Gulf Coast residents in certain areas were warned if they did not evacuate, and indeed, the damage was unfortunately catastrophic and even deadly. Ike left its mark as the costliest storm in Texas history, with initial damage estimates as high as $22 billion. Approximately 75% of the homes in Galveston were damaged, and glass blown out of skyscrapers littered the streets of downtown Houston. Almost as painful as the initial landfall was the agonizing recovery progress that left many victims frustrated and even angry with the federal government. So, what lessons did we learn? What did we do right, and what could we have done better? Could the loss of life and property have been minimized? And how could the recovery effort been improved? This panel will examine what can be done now to lessen the impact of Texas' next storm. We know other storms will be coming, but in the larger view, what we'd like to have come out of panel discussions and our analysis of these catastrophes that hit us here at home is what can we do to improve our reaction to the next one, be it a natural cause disaster like a hurricane, or if it's a disaster, man-made, an act of terrorism that involves emergency measures and evacuation. So I would like to turn first to Mayor White. Mayor White has to leave at 6. That will not be the signal for all of you to leave. But so I'm going to turn the panel over to him. Of course, the biographies, the CVs of our distinguished panelists are in your program. Bill White, the mayor of Houston. We've seen his hands-on management style in this city, and this is the only time I'm against term limits, but Mayor White has been, in my view, an outstanding mayor of the city of Houston and comes with a great deal of expertise. Lyda Ann Thomas, the mayor of Galveston, she was in the front lines, a Galveston native with deep roots and a passionate commitment to her community. She became mayor of Galveston in 2002. She's done a lot for the infrastructure improvements of Galveston, the economics of the city, and the enhancement of quality of life and other accomplishments. Her leadership during Hurricane Rita evacuation in 2005 and for her efforts during Hurricane Ike have been recognized. We have Paul Burka, the senior executive editor of Texas Monthly. He's a great writer. He joined the staff in '74. He was born in Galveston. He's a Rice University graduate, and he wrote about Hurricane Ike in the November 2008 with a story titled My Frail Island. And Joan Newhouse-Shawn, who's our fellow here at the Baker Institute on Homeland Security and Terrorism. She has been working very closely with me, and we have been working with Mayor Bill White and Ed Emmett of Harris County on Houston-Harris County Regional Homeland Security Advisory Council. And Joan comes with very deep experience in security, national security issues, and she is very much involved in these issues. So without much further ado, I would like to ask Mayor White for his views, a view from the ground on the story itself, its aftermath. Where do things stand? How have cities moved forward? What are the biggest problems that remain? And what did we learn from Ike that will take us going forward? Mayor White.
Is that all? Thank you for hosting us, and I'm honored to be on such a distinguished panel. First, I'd say we learned the devastation of a storm, which right now is the third largest in terms of property damage in the history of the United States of America, and that number is growing as claims are adjusted. One thing that we learned, and I hope people remember is that we can't control the weather, and nor are meteorologists perfect in their forecast. And they can't be with all the variables that affect these storms. Mayor Thomas and all of us that were involved can know full well what happens when when a storm can turn very quickly on a high pressure ridge. We just barely avoided Hurricane Rita when it turned in a way that was considered a 5% probability just 96 hours out. And of course, this storm turned quickly, which puts a premium on information and preparation of the citizens. The citizens learned, I think principally from the Rita evacuation, that if you're not in an area where you have a mandatory evacuation, you don't need to, load up all your possessions in all your cars and get on the freeways at the same time. The evacuation by zip code was worked fairly successfully in this case, and I think that is an important lesson learned. The special needs registration that we did, with over 10,000 people registered, I think approximately 1,200 or so were in mandatory evacuation areas, worked well. The medical evacuation and those from nursing facilities, we really learned a lesson from Katrina and went to school quickly after that. And I would say that both the facilities themselves and the state of Texas and a regional task force focusing on medical evacuation and people with special needs, such as assisted living centers, went far better than we had seen it happen during Rita and has occurred in other parts of this country. Although I will also say that it spotlighted some of the deficiencies of those individuals who have both independent and assisted living centers. There were some deficiencies that were the responsibility of those operators, particularly in backup water and power systems. We also had learned from Katrina to establish some refuges of last resort, which would not be publicized, so we didn't have tens of thousands of people streaming into places that would create their own public safety hazards. The use of the George R. Brown as a transportation hub for the region we used during Rita, and it worked very successfully, as well as the emergency medical facilities that were established there. Our entire medical community approved, as it has in the past, that it is a tremendous resource, not just for this community, but for people throughout the region. Lessons learned, what we need to do better in the future. I think we all appreciate, if we didn't do so before, the benefits of electricity and reliable electricity. The wrong lessons shouldn't be learned, ones that would cause people to triple their electrical rates for a type of storm in reaction to a storm that is a storm with, as I say, of unprecedented property loss within this particular region over many decades. However, there will be a task force that we appointed, an expert task force, that will make recommendations that we hope will be adopted by the PUC and by the transmission and distribution company, that are implemented over a period of time to provide more distributed generation in a cost-effective manner, to do some things that will allow, over time, the hardening of some facilities, and certainly they better trim some trees. The impact of the economic impact obviously was very severe, and I won't go into that economic impact. Post-Ike recovery, we learned the resilience of this community, didn't we? I mean, when you think about it, it may have been it's a notion that I prayed on, thought a lot about of what to say to let people know that if people woke up and they were alive, then to say a prayer and go out and help their neighbors. And that's what you saw. You saw it throughout the Gulf Coast area. Certainly we saw it in the city of Houston. Neighborhoods that had water lapping into the yards because the storm drains had been clogged, and trees fallen on every single lot and in multiple trees across within a city block, impairing mobility and emergency response within a matter of some 36 hours. In many neighborhoods, the strong people with saws and chains and trucks got out there and got it done and didn't wait simply for somebody from the government to show up. We were able to clear the thoroughfares. It was the most massive debris removal program ever by the amount of debris that was removed within this community. And as we've surveyed for citizen critique, had close to 86% customer satisfaction. In this particular hurricane season, I think all citizens will be alert to keeping their eye on the weather, and that it is not just a trivial thing when a storm comes into the Gulf of Mexico. We hope we will learn, and this is more than I'll go into here, the limits, what the federal government can and cannot do, and it still has some chronic problems of getting the financial relief in the hands of the local officials very quickly, and leaving it to the local officials to use those resources in a way that is effective. Both I and Mayor Thomas could give you examples after examples of that. Something in the heart of people within the middle management of these federal bureaucracies convinces them that they know better than local officials how to spend money and what kind of things need to be done to allow communities to recover. Sometimes that's because of congressional mandate, and I've found generally those responsible local officials closest to the scene will be able to make the best judgment by the communities of how to expend the resources. Suffice to say that, as an example, Congress acted within a month to secure additional dollars known as CDBG dollars, Community Development Block Grant dollars, and I doubt whether a penny of some $6.5 billion, some $4.8 billion allocated to the Ike disaster, most of that attributable to damage in Texas, and I doubt whether a penny has been given to and spent by local municipalities to this day. That's not what I call a prompt emergency response. With that, I want to, thank you all for participating in this panel. Look forward to the comments from the other participants.
Thank you, Mayor White. Now, Mayor Thomas.
Well, I share Mayor White's overview, because what happened in Galveston also happened in Houston and vice versa. However, I think there were some differences. I first of all would like to tell you where we are today, and then go from that to lessons learned, and then challenges that I think we face on the island. Our debris cleanup process in Galveston worked very well. We have cleaned up the island. For those of you who are from Galveston, and I see some of my friends here, the Balinese Room and Murdoch's and Hooters ended up on the top of the seawall, which is truly a disaster, especially for the Balinese Room and Murdoch's, where we all had some great times. The seawall was, and the whole city was a shambles. We got it cleaned up very quickly. One of the interesting pieces to debris cleanup has to do with the fact that TxDOT controls the main thoroughfares on the island: Broadway, 61st Street, Ferry Road. And for several weeks, actually, after the storm, the streets and 3005 as well, they also control that. The streets got cleaned up, but debris and boats and trash remained on Broadway and the thoroughfares I've just mentioned. And we found out after 4 weeks, I think, that TxDOT would not allow us to clean up the thoroughfares because that was their territory. Now, what we've done well, we made some phone calls and got TxDOT to come down. TxDOT then had to go out for bids, and that took another month. The contractor that they chose was someone from, I don't know where, but he had one truck or two trucks, and only one worked at a time. So it took about 3 months for us to get our roads, our main thoroughfares, cleaned up by TxDOT. The same issue occurred along the beachfront because the GLO would not allow our debris people, with whom we had prearranged contracts, to go out on the beaches and start cleaning them up, and they were, as you can imagine, a mess. So they had to go out for bids. The point here is that after Katrina, and certainly after Rita, I had asked the city manager in Galveston to have prearranged debris cleanup, debris contracts, prearranged sheltering contracts. We went to the city of Austin in order to be able to transport our residents from Galveston to Austin. We had pre-contracts for fuel in Galveston, so that if the bridges were down and we couldn't get on or off the island, our fuel suppliers would bring the fuel in by barge. We had arrangements with Home Depot and with Walmart. What we need to do now, and I was in Washington last week testifying before another committee, the House subcommittee regarding FEMA. FEMA needs to have prearranged contracts prior to these storms in order to, for instance, bring in necessary generators when the lights go out, in order to bring crews in to help get our pump stations working right away, rather than the cities having to wait for weeks while FEMA figures out who they want to send into our towns and get us started again. I was speaking earlier about the Red Cross. A lesson learned with the Red Cross is that because of the old rules that say to the Red Cross, when you go into Galveston or Houston or anywhere else, the Red Cross is allowed to set up a shelter inside of a school or a convention center, which happened here in Houston after Rita. But after Ike in Galveston, everything was wet, and we couldn't use the schools or the convention centers. And so the Red Cross said, well, we'll have to get someone to put up tents for 1,000 or 1,500 people. Our numbers obviously are much smaller than those in Houston, but it's all relative to the size of Galveston, so 1,500, 2,000 people who are without shelter is a big number for us. The Red Cross said to FEMA, well, we have to get these tents, and the FEMA said, well, no, that's not our responsibility, that's the state's responsibility. The state said, no, we don't have to get those, we don't have to get a vendor in here to put up the tents, the food, the laundry, the toilets. That's the city's job. Well, the city did sign the contract, and FEMA said, yeah, well, we'll take care of it. It's 6 months later. The bill is $3 million, which for the city of Galveston is a huge number. And when I was in Washington last week, I mentioned to the congressman with whom I was discussing all of this that we were still waiting. And they said, well, what is the reason for FEMA to deny this payment? Well, FEMA said they needed a list of all the people in the tents. Well, the people in the tents came in and went out of the tents, or they found a place to live on the mainland, or they found an apartment. Well, we still need a list of all the names. Well, the Red Cross said, well, we can't give you those names because of the Privacy Act. So now FEMA was sitting, doing nothing. We were not paying anybody. But it was very interesting because overnight we got word from Washington that the $3 million request for money is not in the pipeline. It's at the top of the pipeline, and we're going to get, the vendor is, we don't, the vendor will get paid soon. So as Mayor White said, we do have problems with FEMA, but it's simply because that bureaucracy has been allowed to build and build and build and build over the years. But it is a major problem as far as recovery is concerned. I think that it's also came to light, and most of you probably know this, after Katrina, and I think it's fair to say that Houston, Galveston, and others learned a great deal from Katrina and Rita that has been very helpful to us during Ike. We all knew after Katrina that people would evacuate if they could, but those of our citizens who rely on public transportation have no choice except to wait for the city to put them on buses and take them out. People will not evacuate if they cannot take their animals. And we, after Rita, evacuated 3,900 people and their animals, and I cannot tell you what an interesting day that was. We had snakes and birds and cats and dogs, and they had to have cages, and some people didn't have cages. But just as Mayor White is very proud of the way Houston took care of the Katrina victims, Galveston was very proud of the way we got our citizens out, thinking that Rita was coming. It was a lesson learned because we had to rely on school buses, which were not air-conditioned, and many of them did not have chair lists, and so that led us to have, again, a preconditioned contract, in this particular case with Metro, to come in. This was right after Rita, thinking, you know, we had no idea when we'd have to use them, but fortunately we had those buses standing by when Ike hit us, and we were able to get everybody out. The other piece of this does involve Houston, and it does have to do with communications, which were much better during the Ike episode. We learned a great deal about evacuation, and I don't want to take up all the time to go into it, but the communication that has been developed between certainly UTMB and the Houston hospitals and the medical care facilities in Austin has been great and did take care of so many of our citizens who are in need of continuing medical care once they leave our cities and go somewhere to be sheltered. And the communications between Galveston and Harris County regarding evacuation were so much better than they were during Rita. And we did learn from the Rita event. And I do have to thank Mayor White and Judge Emmett and the people of Houston for waiting to let us get out. It's not just Galveston, it's that whole region, it's Brazoria County, it's Texas City, to get out first. And it's been a monumental effort. But we all worked together this time, and things were a lot better. I'm going to stop now because I think we're short on time. You know, I can spend, Mr. Ambassador said I could have at least 10 hours, but you're not going to sit here for 10 hours. And I've been in Austin testifying all morning, so I will stop now, Mr. Ambassador, and let you go on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thomas, I'd like to ask Paul Burka to give some brief insights. He's a man who I think has his pulse on the life and culture of Galveston and has written about it, and if you could give us some of your insights, Paul.
Thank you. I will tell you my favorite hurricane story is someone growing up in Galveston. When my sister got married in the 1970s, she was married in New York, and my mother held a welcoming party for her and her husband in Galveston. And she asked me to help with a guest list, which started out at about 250 people. And I went through it, and I came across a name, and I said, "Mother, you don't have to have this person. She's never been in our house." And my mother said, "Oh, yes, I do." She said, "My grandparents spent the night with her parents during the 1900 storm." And that is sort of the psychological hold that storms have on Galveston. We live on a sandbar in the Gulf of Mexico. It's 8 feet high at its highest point, not counting the artificial height of the island that rises to meet the seawall. And it is indeed a frail island. It has withstood many storms, and it's going to withstand Ike, but at a great cost. I think that we learned a couple of lessons that I think are going to be very difficult for the people of Galveston to absorb. I think all of us sort of assumed that if you lived behind the seawall, you were safe. And what Ike showed that was not true. And that the storm, as it came up into the bay, it pushed an enormous amount of water in front of it into the bay, and some of it spread out over eastern Harris County. And ultimately, all of that water had to come out. And it came back in I think the official scientific name for it is called a seiche, which is a standing or a moving wall of water. And it was about 11 feet high. It came in out of the bay, smashed in through Offutt's Bayou, and completely wiped out the homes on very lovely stretch of a coastline there, and into the nicest residential areas, and and it ran all the way almost to the seawall. When I went down to write a story about it, and Representative Craig Island from Galveston had directed me to go to the ball fields that were close to the seawall out on 75th Street. And there were cyclone fences there that were designed to protect the people watching, and they were about 11 feet high. And they were they were tilting at an angle from the water, and at the very top of this fence, there was a line of dead vegetation that had been left by the storm. So that's how high it was. And these were people who lived behind the seawall, and they weren't safe, and that's why this incredible number of structures in Galveston that were damaged, 75%, and that's just a huge number. And I guess my question and concern is: are people, can people live with that knowledge that you could be wiped out from the bay, and that the seawall can hold, but that you can still be devastated? And I think that's what's caused. There's been a loss of jobs, of course, on the island, which is one reason people have moved. But I think also this concern that we're not safe from the bay is going to be a problem for those who contemplate whether to leave or go. This was a Category 2 storm. I think another thing that we learned was that Category 2 doesn't sound like much when you realize that there are 5 categories, and you can get up to 165 miles an hour in Category 5 winds and Category 5 storms. But as it happened, Category 2 was devastating because it was so large and it moved so much water. And the storm surge wasn't as high as people had feared, but it was just a huge dome of water. And so that is something we're going to have to deal with in the future. I think the third challenge that we face in Galveston is whether, and in Harris, doesn't really apply to all of Harris County, because Not all of Harris County is some of it is exempted from the higher windstorm insurance rates, but there's a question of whether there is a political will in Texas to deal with the problems of these recurring storms. And last year it was not only Ike. There was a hurricane there was a serious hurricane in the valley, and there is considerable damage. We have a windstorm insurance pool in Texas, but when you get a major hurricane like Ike, you do have the question of whether the state has the will and the financial resources to operate a pool that will adequately protect the people of the coast. Many insurers are no longer insuring on the coast privately. So I think the political issues that came up really cut very deeply, because we saw the University of Texas Regents attempt to cut Galveston loose, downsize the medical school, downsize the hospital, and not wanting to spend the money for indigent care. And so the economic future of the city was threatened. So we all know that Texas politics is composed largely of statesmen, but every once in a while, just a few might not see the importance, if you live in Amarillo, the importance of protecting the coast and the people who live there. So I think there's a political challenge as well, and that's what I saw in this storm as the big concerns for Galveston. And I think I hope that Galveston, which has developed somewhat of a more diversified economic base over the last few years, I think there's going to need to be a concerted effort to continue to diversify that economic base if the city is going to come back and thrive. That's and I, as somebody who was born on the island, I certainly want to see those things happen.
Thank you very much, Paul. Joan, would you like to make some brief comments on how you see the implications in maybe a larger sense regionally and in terms of disasters and response to these disasters, either man-made or God-made?
Yes, thank you. One of the comments one of the things I was most clear during the hurricane is that the citizens of Galveston County and Chambers County and Harris County are particularly attuned to disasters where other communities might have to plan for these in theory. We have to face them on a regular or annual basis, such as hurricanes. And preparedness has become a culture here, and it's important that it continue to be a culture and that culture be developed, because preparedness has a very direct impact on the response and the recovery after the disaster. There's several things that I think distinguish this region from other parts of the country. First is that we have close cooperation at the regional level between government, business, and first responders to protect our community and to respond to the disasters. Second, given the makeup of our industry, infrastructure, our weather, and the geographic location, we have well-established protocols now, even better established protocols after Hurricanes Rita and Katrina for handling evacuations, explosions, even shipping traffic and chemical releases. The third is that one of the unique attributes of our community versus other major metropolitan regions in the nation is that the stakeholders are readily joined together to find innovative solutions and to work during a disaster. And we work at these issues and solutions all year in and year out, because of the nature of our environment and our industrial base. Finally, we've incurred and experienced events that would have been unthought of in other places, such as the mass evacuation of millions of people during Hurricane Rita, the mass evacuation of hundreds of thousands of people into our community during Hurricane Katrina, refinery, pipeline, trucking, and rail car mishaps, often involving chemicals and such things, even as the gasoline cloud from the rupture at 610 and 59 in the 1970s, and having to deal with almost a complete loss of our infrastructure, electrical infrastructure in a number of areas. So I think that we have those are the reasons that preparedness has become part of our culture, and why we've made so much progress really at the push at the local level in recovering from Hurricane Ike. As part of the culture of preparedness, the communities and individuals need to take responsibility for themselves. And generally speaking, nationwide, there's this tendency to expect that the government is going to take control of you. I mean, not take control, but take care of you. And you have to be realistic and pragmatic. When an area of this size contains millions of people, then the government cannot be solely responsible for the health and well-being of all of the citizens. Second is, because the entire community is involved in the preparedness, that same group is involved in the response and recovery, and fundamental to this, and this is sort of a lesson learned, is the cooperation of the private sector. In the recovery process, in the short term and in the long term, the private sector is very, very important. And part of that of the preparedness is protecting those private corporations from liability when they're assisting. So, for example, several years ago, Texas passed a corporate Good Samaritan law. You would not be able to get corporations to join in some recovery efforts if it weren't for them knowing that they were protected in the exercising process and when they are actually needed. A second issue that comes up is that Texas schools are not legally required to participate in mass sheltering as they are in some other states. And part of it is because the school districts are concerned about the liability issues when they bring people into their facility. So that's something to be looked at. How are we doing now? This would be the phase that we would describe as long-term recovery. Generally speaking, the region has made tremendous progress. The monumental cleanup is well underway and is completed in some areas, and Mayor Thomas and Mayor White have described that. Utilities are restored, the roads are open, the ferries are operating, the ship channel is open for drafts up to 43 feet, although we did have someone run aground when it was at 45 feet. As far as the bay environment, Galveston Bay has lost about half of its oyster reefs. This will not only affect the oyster industry, but it has significant long-term, it may have significant long-term impacts on the water quality in the bay. Not all the public access infrastructure is reopened, and some marinas remain closed, and individuals that had owned boats have not replaced them, so our coastal communities and bay communities are hurting from that. Sonar is being done of the Galveston Bay, and thus far approximately 600 to 650 obstructions have been identified, but the plans are not yet in effect for the removal of the water obstructions. Boaters are returning to the bay at their own risk, and in fact they are hitting some of these items. Most importantly, I'd like to report on the condition or mention the role of the Red Cross. The Red Cross is critical in any response effort. They are tasked with providing food, shelter, and health care. The shelters are predominantly churches and to some extent schools. The schools, as I said, are opting out. No organization, or the Red Cross does not own its own shelters. It depends on private citizens and organizations for the sheltering. This is such a critical piece of our response effort, and yet it is a private nonprofit organization that receives no federal funding. During Hurricane Ike, they served 4.5 million meals. They had 22,000 overnight stays. They were sheltering 3,000 people. They had 23,000 health encounters, 21,000 health service contacts. They had to deal with weapons in their shelters and drug addiction, and the entire effort is funded by private donations. Recently, the Red Cross has gone to Congress to request $100 million in funding because their National Disaster Relief Fund has been depleted, and this will be the first time that they've asked the federal government for funding, and I think it's remarkable that such an essential part of our response and recovery is a private effort. And that's it. I have some slides. I don't know if they were already shown, but did you see them? You saw the slides already of East Galveston County and Chambers County.
Thank you, Joan. Since Mayor White has to leave in about 5 minutes, I'd like to open up the floor to the audience. Questions in the first instance to Mayor White and then to Mayor Thomas and the other panelists. But if anyone has questions, please go to the mics or comments they would like to make.
This is for Mayor White. You talked earlier about the problem of getting the power back. Understanding that most of in the older neighborhoods in Houston, we're using technology that's 60 years old, as in the overhead transformers. Is there any long-term plan to build in the older areas, the underground energy and electricity?
There are several different ways that you could make the power grid more resilient. Some involve the principal damage caused, which is the principal damage was caused by trees that were downed. It wasn't so much the big utility poles, and almost none of the metal transformers went down. And so it was the interaction. We don't want to ban trees. That would be terrible for our city. But obviously the species of trees and where they're planted and the maintenance has to be a high priority. Another priority over the longer run, if we're looking out a period of 10, 20, 30 years, is that the grid can be made more resilient by more distributed power. Fuel cells, gas-fired generators that, we do have an underground gas system, and it can be linked up to distributed power generators, and it can have a dual use as well, of providing a source of peak power that is more efficient than a large-scale power plant. And then the third is looking at places where you could have you could put some of the power lines underground. Now, there was a recent study commissioned by the PUC, just released a week ago. And believe me, now listen what I'm going to, transmission and distribution company, the utility executives would be fine with spending $10, $20 billion and getting a regulated return on that. Did you hear what I just said? But if we're going to do that, then and avoid the fact that people would see their utility bills skyrocket if we authorize that. A better plan is to have putting some of the infrastructure underground in connection with drainage and street improvement projects that occur over an extended period of time, and to have means where some of those costs can be fairly allocated to those places in which it is done. Currently, for example, the company that does it, CenterPoint, would be required, under current practice, has been 100 years in the making, those costs would be added to everybody's bill, and there are no good options which need to be created for individuals in the built infrastructure and communities basically to assess themselves and to have some kind of assessment where the area would get a significant benefit and where people were willing to pay. So I don't want to give you the impression that you could snap your fingers and put it all underground, nor do I want to give you the impression, as this report points out, that there are other maintenance costs which rise significantly when underground utilities are less accessible to repair. because then when those underground conduits start degrading, and they do degrade over time, I'll tell you, somebody who runs a water sewer system, then going up and doing underground construction and repair is much more intrusive and costly than above ground. And with that, Mr. Ambassador, I will have to go. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We'll be in touch with you.
Thank you. I'll get that. Thank you, John. Good presentation. Thank you.
Here's your pen.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Well, I think maybe hers.
Oh, that's your pen. Okay. Thank you, Bill. Okay. Other questions?
Yes, we're talking about cleaning up the mess after a storm and protecting existing communities. I believe that the population of people living within tidal surge areas will grow to over 1 million people within the next 20, 25 years. Most of those people are new to this danger, coming from other parts of the world. Is this wise social policy to attract and try to attract people to live in these dangerous circumstances?
Who would like to take that?
Well, I think that I'll make a stab at it. First of all, what we're working on in Galveston and Houston in the region is shoreline protection. And the very reason for that is because people are continuing to come, certainly to the beach. People who live in cities, not in Texas or some inland Texas, always look for water, and the beach in Galveston certainly offers that. We also have a port to protect, as does Houston, and we have Galveston Bay, which Joan has talked about. The long-term priority for those of us in Galveston and Houston will be shoreline protection. There is a concept that's that has been developed by Dr. William Merrill at Texas A&M. It's only a concept. It's called an Ike dike. It will extend the seawall that is in Galveston now to the west end of the island, and then east there will either be seawalls or a series of levees or break fronts out into the Gulf. It calls for gates, surge gates that are used in Holland, and they're gates that protect the Thames River, that swing out in the event of a surge and help break the velocity of the water. So to answer your question, cities, in order for cities to survive, they must continue looking to the future, that we must continue to try to attract industry, be it medical complexes or petroleum companies. And in order to do that, in order to have that investment, we also have to look at shoreline protection. I do think, certainly in Galveston, when people buy property on the beach, they are well aware, and they actually sign agreements with the realtors that they are in harm's way from the Gulf of Mexico. So people do get notified. They are aware of it. Again, it's the water, it's the sand, it's our ports. So people will continue to come, and we must make every effort to protect them and their investment, beginning now.
Sir.
I'm Ken Maddox. I'm chief of the medical staff at the Ben Taub Hospital. With Katrina, Rita, and now Ike, we have demonstrated how in this region of Texas we can work together medically in a metro method unlike any other place in the United States. We also have 35% unemployment. We have a significant number of individuals who are not normally citizens of this state, but who are part of our employment work pool. providing to us a medical challenge that we have met. My suggestion is, now that we have demonstrated, and in the past, our city health care, our county health care, our regional health care have been different racks and only connected governmentally through the Houston-Galveston Area Council. But we have shown how we can absolutely work in the metro area together. I would like to propose that we continue that demonstration and that there may be a multi-county health district, much like the Port Authority. And to me, we have the opportunity to have a federal health region that roughly is equivalent to the Houston-Galveston Area Council that could perhaps get $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion a year for the entire region as a demonstration project to show the effectiveness, continuing what we've already shown that we can do together in a very effective way, and we've done that since Katrina.
You want an answer to that?
Let's join together and make it happen.
Well, I agree with you, and we are joining together as a region. The funding, for instance, for the Ike Dike, if it comes to pass, will be asked for in the form of a partnership with Galveston, Houston, Beaumont, Texas City, and we certainly can do the same thing with the medical community. And just as an aside, we have been given approval by the regents today or yesterday to bring UTMB back, and UTMB. One of the reasons I think it's the regents. There are a lot of reasons why the regents may be smiling kindly upon UTMB. A lot, but one of the reasons I believe is because UTMB is very much a part of the regional medical service, and I think that's been proven. So I wish you luck with that. I would certainly support it. I would think that it would come more from the medical community than certainly from the city side, but I appreciate the suggestion.
I think this could be one of the, what we're planning to do as part of this panel is to have the Baker Institute do a very short white paper on not only lessons learned, but what some of the more productive ideas are. What did we learn from this and what we can do in the future to cope with these disasters more effectively. And a structural proposal like that makes interest. If you'd like to give Joan Newhouse here some more specifics on that directly, I appreciate it, because we can incorporate these ideas in our paper. Sir.
My name is Ryan Leach. I'm with Neighborhood Centers, Inc. This question is for Ms. Newhouse. Our organization is working with FEMA on a pilot program focusing on long-term recovery after disaster and concentrating on the 34 counties, but our organization specifically with Harris County and Galveston County, the counties that really have the bulk, a majority of the cases. As far as long-term recovery goes, you spoke about Red Cross taking on a brunt of a lot of the response. As far as long-term recovery goes, what issues have you noticed, or what questions should we ask as we're sort of embarking on this pilot program that are important, that we should be aware of?
When it comes to long-term recovery, the private sector is in the arena, as is FEMA. FEMA's red tape has been a tremendous burden to a large number of people. If you were prepared with the preparedness kit and had all your documents, etc., then those that were responsible and could file insurance claims are doing relatively well. Even if you have done that, if you were also making a FEMA claim, They're minor issues such as FEMA will place a lien on your property before you even see any money from them. That has caused some people to say, I just don't want the federal government in my life. Some of the communities, one of the communities, Oak Island, which you saw the photographs of, they have tried the FEMA approach and they will continue because it's a long-term approach, but their needs were met by primarily faith-based organizations of all faiths. And when they were in need of food and water and ice, someone from Mississippi just sent a tractor trailer over because she had grown up in the community. So they are really focused on the faith-based organizations where there are hundreds of volunteers coming to help clean up the communities. So the long-term effort seems to be on the backs of the faith-based organizations and FEMA, if you can manage to make it through all the paperwork, which again has been a tremendous issue. You saw the pictures of those communities in East Galveston County that were basically wiped clean. I would like to comment, though, on the building codes when it comes to other parts of the community. With the new building codes, if you go to San Luis Pass, the new construction, some of them look like they didn't even have their paint scratched. So when you're talking about people moving into those coastal areas that might have to evacuate, returning to your previous question, one is if you have them prepared with their preparedness kit, they know that they're in the surge zone and they get out. When they come back, they won't have lost everything. I think that's an important point to make. You don't have to expect that the sandbar will be wiped clean. Did I answer?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
Joan, this is for you because you're kind of the person that's the liaison here. I ranch over in East Chambers County in that area, and I can tell you that they have some real problems. One of the problems now is being reimbursed by FEMA for any expenses. That program, they're still not even yet able to have any place for us to go and to give our information, which we need to look at on an overall basis for emergencies, not only natural disasters, but the things that you're concerned with. One of the things that's been somewhat overlooked, and hopefully the Cattle Raisers Association is being involved, but the livestock issues. We took in over 2,000 head of stray cattle that we had to take care of for 6 weeks before we could get them repatriated to their owners at expense and time and effort. And in certain things like this, there are a lot of people lost a lot of cattle, and they're still having problems over there, which is a problem. So we really need to kind of look at that when we start looking at not only man-made, but natural disasters, but also man-made disasters. Also, I'm sure people have talked about it, but certain maybe tax abatements for private industry to install generators at filling stations and pharmacies and things like that. Those are some areas that probably should be looked at. I'm sure that y'all are doing that, but to get us up and running. And then the third thing is the city of Houston's water supply. We came very precious close of losing it all because we're basically concerned getting water from certain areas of basically the east side of town. There are some long-term plans about diversifying, but we need to look at fortifying in the short term our water supply here for the city of Houston, because we can make it without electricity, but ice and water or in fuel certainly are the more important things. And this, affects the overall general area. And it's nice to know that we're looking at some kind of storm surge protection, because over in our area, our ranch headquarters is 19 feet, and we had water storm surge at 19 feet, and further to the east, seen that's 11 miles inland, and I have friends further to the east at 15 and 20 miles inland that had storm surge. So people don't realize the magnitude over here in Houston and even in Galveston, because the storm turned and it hit a little bit further to the east. But that's kind of more to your area. I wish the mayor had been there, but thank you.
Well, thank you. There has been work done on this, particularly in the water supply issue after Rita, because we had some issues related to it at that time. So they've done some reinforcements. But thank you for your comments.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. Mine is just an observation about communication and what happened. I live in Houston, and
could you speak into the microphone, please?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I live in Houston, and I have an old-fashioned telephone that runs through a wire into the wall, and I was very popular because all the cell phone towers did not work, and which was fine. And it was good that I had it because there were several of my neighbors that, you know, were able to reassure friends and family that they were okay. But the direct communication lines in the immediate aftermath seemed to me like something that I wasn't expected or anticipated. Radio stations picked up the slack and passed on information as best they could. But I think communication, which was handled as well as it could be in a sort of ad hoc manner, really needs to have a more systemized approach to it the next time around.
I am a firm believer in communications, and that communications be simple and be redundant. And by that I mean, you're right, you need more than just a BlackBerry and a cell phone. The hardwire line means a lot. And the radio is very, very important when all other means of communication is down, particularly when you don't have electricity to recharge your cell phone. So it has been looked at. There's been, for example, a large investment made in reverse 911 call system. But I still think that it's important for us to maintain and maybe rebuild our very simple civil defense communication systems when all the electricity goes down, such as the firehouse siren tuning you into your local radio so that you know that a disaster is occurring. Thank you for your comment.
I'd like to address that.
Sure. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
The hospitals and the community really relied on television and radio. It's fantastic. I am concerned about this next season because of the delay in the conversion of the television issues. That new television, whatever it's going to be, is going to be in the middle of hurricane season. Many people in this community had battery-operated televisions, and that's where they got their local information. If they do not convert, and there's a lot of converters that don't work, the number of people in the community who don't have a television is going to be much greater because they haven't had this opportunity to be forced to convert because there was the lag period that somebody made the decision. So that, in my view, is a concern in our alternate means of communication as we approach this hurricane season.
Thank you for that encouraging note.
In addition to the fact that some radios pick up the broadcast, the television broadcast sound.
Okay. Sir.
Thank you. My name is John Wilson with Harris County Department of Education. For a number of years, the department, through the Center for Safe and Secure Schools, have worked with the Harris County Office of Emergency Management, the City of Houston Office of Emergency Management, dealing with issues related to education, starting with the flood, Allison, going through Katrina to Rita to more recently Ike. So my comments have to do with public policy. This is not addressed to any one of the three of you, just you in general, of issues that we believe that from an education standpoint that ought to be considered. You mentioned the issue of liability. It is a concern. There are many issues there Transportation is a big piece in the liability because public schools have a great vulnerability in that arena, but they also have the same vulnerability when they're dealing with people that are in fragile conditions and they're occupying the school facilities, as well as the issues of people that are mentally unstable and other matters regarding that. So there's some assistance that needs to be done in that area. I'd also like to talk to you about the appropriateness of facilities. Somehow we think that those schools out there suddenly can become shelters, either refuges of last resort or shelters of some kind. And we've given very little thought to the to the windstorm worthiness of those facilities. Excuse me. They have a lot of glass. Many times they're built many years ago. We don't necessarily know that those roofs are going to hold. Those are concerns. So from a public policy standpoint, I would like to suggest that not only from a school perspective, but from public buildings and any other facility, that this city and this area developed hardened facilities that have the capacity to withstand not just a Cat 1 or Cat 2 storm. We better think about if we have something that has 160 mile an hour wind, and what is the staying power of that? There's a second piece to that. We talked a lot about electricity. Some schools have generators, but we got to understand if they have a generator, it won't run the HVAC. It would only generally run lights. And those schools get hot because the schools that are built this day and time are built to be air conditioned. They're not like they were 50 years ago where you can open windows and there's this flow through of air. So the issue of the adequate generation so that you can run the entire facility is an important issue. In some cases, schools, districts, and their facilities have been called on to house medically fragile people. The Campbell Center in Aldine was an example. And it was not designed ever to be used like that. Most people don't know that that facility has to, if you run a generator, it's got a separate generational system for its electricity for the facility, but there's also a separate generation facility for its sewer and also its water system. Those are issues that are important. Sometimes in our planning, we assume that these facilities are ready to go. I would like to say something about transportation. I don't know if any of you have ridden on a school bus lately, but I'd invite all of you to take a ride. And then ask yourself, would you like to go 250 miles to Dallas or to Austin on that? And if you're in good shape, you might be all right. But what if you're medically fragile? What if you're elderly? What if you're disabled? Sometimes we assume that they can make that ride. And we have people that in terms of policy planning thinking that that's going to be our solution. We're suddenly going to move these people from Galveston and Texas City and lower part of eastern part of Harris County, and we're going to take those to Austin. We have people that are dying because of that. People died during Ike in that transportation. The saying that is frequent among all of us is run from the water and hide from the wind. I'd like to suggest from a public policy standpoint that it's not good policy to move people 250, 300 miles, but rather we ought to develop facilities that we can house our own on the west side, like the Florida model. That's what they do when they move. They don't go all the way to Georgia. They move far enough so that they get out of the surge zone. So those are just some thoughts that I have for you. We do a lot of work with the agencies. We're proud of the work that we've done. We've come a long way since Allison and since Katrina and Rita. Every time we've made improvements, and we want to continue to be a partner in solving community situations because schools are an integral part of our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments.
I do have a response to that. The city is actually working on an assessment. I don't know what state it's in, but going through, and I believe with Rice University, and assessing many of the buildings or most of the buildings in the community for what level of wind they can stand. Exactly to your point, so that you know which buildings, when you have an issue of shelter from the wind, which buildings will withstand the wind. The next is in moving the people who are medically fragile. It depends which community you're talking about, but many of the people in the surge zones are only moved as far as West or Northwest Harris County, and systems are set up to move into hotels, and they're pre-contracted. I don't know what percentage of the population is taken care of in that manner, but exactly what you were thinking, they are in the process of trying to implement as best they can.
This is going to have to be the last question.
My name is Rick Barron, class of 77 Rise. And this is kind of directed, I guess, my question to Mayor Thomas. I've read recently that there's been some tremendous commitments, monetary commitments from the private sector, like the Seeley Smith Foundation and the rebuilding of UTMB. My question is, what about some of the other major private sectors down there, like the Moody Foundation, the Mitchell interest, the Fertitta interest? What sort of responses have they given in terms of the rebuilding of Galveston?
I don't know the numbers, but I know that I can give you one. The Mitchell family's investing $25 to $30 million in restoring the Strand and their buildings and bringing the businesses back. Seeley Smith Foundation committed today $200 million to renovate John Seeley Hospital and to help support the building of the new Jenny Seeley Surgical Hospital and Trauma Center. The Moody's, the Kempners, the Fertittas have for years, particularly the Moody's and the Kempners, and individual members of the Seeley family have for years supported UTMB research, equipment, and they still are and they still will. As far as corporate contributions, I don't know what they are, but I know there have been many. There have been some millions of dollars to help students, the medical students, find places to live or to replace the books that they lost. As Joan said, from the private sector, from the churches, from the philanthropies, in Galveston and Houston, they have all come forward, and I think they will continue to do so. Mr. Ambassador, before you close, and I know you want to, I would just like to...
No, I don't want to close, but I just want...
Well, I did not express the challenges that Galveston faces, and I'd like to just express a few of them. Number one, our property taxes are down at least 40%. Our sales taxes, the same. We had a population of 58,000. We're looking at about 44,000. That's a very rough number. Some people are coming back. We don't know how many or when they'll all be back. We've had to close 3 schools because of lack of students. Our neighborhoods, many of our neighborhoods are in shambles, particularly north of Broadway. We have the Port of Galveston, which was back in operation 8 days after the storm. We now have UTMB over the next 5 years will be restored. The point that I'm trying to make is that for people to come back to Galveston, we have to rebuild our neighborhoods. We have to try to attract middle-income citizens, many of whom left because UTMB laid off approximately 130 physicians, nurses, and technicians, and they have basically gone from the island. And of course, one of our biggest challenges has been and continues to be the fact that 65% of the people who live on Galveston Island are renters, and only 40% are homeowners. We have been working for years to reverse that trend, and now Ike will make it even more of a challenge. And last but not least, which we've already mentioned, 2 things. Number one, jobs are hard to find in Galveston, and we depend a great deal on UTMB and certainly our port, and we look forward to those jobs coming back. And then there's shoreline protection, which I've already spoken about. We must have it in order to attract citizens to come back to the island and live and invest. I just wanted to point that out to you because Galveston has a very long way to go. We do appreciate the fact that the General Land Office is putting new sand on our beaches, and I just want to point out to you that the reason for the sand, of course, is to help our tourist business, which is one of our largest businesses on the island. But that sand also protects the base of the seawall, which during these storms does suffer some undermining. So the sand that you see there has two purposes: one for visitors and two to protect the seawall. But all of that being said, I hope you will come to Galveston. I hope you will go to the beach. I hope you will consider living there. And Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to represent Galveston tonight. And as I told Joan earlier, if I can help you, particularly with our one great challenge that resulted from Ike, is something called reentry. We had a problem during our evacuation on the roads when we left after Rita, and getting people back to Galveston after Ike was a real problem, mainly because we had no water, no sewage, no electricity, and the gas company had shut off the valve at Tiki Island, so we had no gas. So I would like to talk to you at length about a reentry program that will help get our people back in a more orderly fashion. We got them all back, and then I had to tell them all to leave because they were showing up with viruses that were being caused. There were health problems that were being caused because of no water. At any rate, thank you. Hope you all come to the island, and I'll certainly come to Houston once in a while.
Mayor Thomas, I think on behalf of everyone, to commend you for your leadership. And the whole purpose of this discussion tonight is the role that we can play as a public policy institute in defining what some of the issues are, the lessons learned, and getting that message across to Washington, to the state, local governments, private sector, and we will do that. I want to also commend our other panelists, Mayor Bill White, who's done an outstanding job, Paul, Burka, Joan, for their work and their participation. And I also want to commend the members of the audience, and some of the ideas that you presented will go into our deliberations. And if you do have ideas that you think are worthy of our consideration, please send them to us, because this is an issue that obviously we got to get ready for the next one and the next ones. And hopefully we'll be able to improve. But I think a lot of good ideas have come out of this. Thank you very much. Thank you.